Hello, welcome. My name is Elise Ruiz. I'm the OSEJ project manager for the Regional Water Equity effort, and we'll be getting started here in just a few moments. We'll let some folks trickle in here. Good evening, everyone. We're just letting folks trickle in before we get started. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. All right, as folks trickle in, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Elise Ruiz. I'm a group program manager with the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. Today, we're here to talk about the basics of graywater, which is a component that's being explored in the regional water equity effort. And if anyone does need Spanish translation, we do have an interpreter here with us tonight. So if you do need translation, please let me know or raise your hand virtually within Zoom. All right, we've got a few folks still coming in. Again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We'll get started here in just another moment. And just a reminder, if you do need Spanish translation, to let us know. We're happy to set you up with our interpreter. And this overall will be about an hour event, and we'll be having a breakout room session later to go over the overall presentation and hear your feedback about your experience with water. So that'll be at the last end of this overall effort. So thank you again for joining. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to go over how we'll be spending our time here together tonight. Again, my name is Elise Ruiz. I'm a group program manager with the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. I'm the project lead for this overall effort, so I'm happy to be a resource to answer any questions later on. But first, we'll be doing a general introduction of what the Regional Water Equity effort is, and I'll take a few minutes before we lead into our special topic presentation to go over the basics of gray water. Once we complete that, we'll go into the breakout rooms, as I mentioned, and so we can have an opportunity to speak with all of you about your thoughts about this overall effort. I will be a part of the breakout rooms, and so will our special topic speaker. So if you do have questions for me or the speaker, we're happy to answer any questions you may have. But overall, we really are interested in hearing your responses about the overall effort and your experience with water in general. Then we'll come back together at the end for closing thoughts and next steps of this overall effort. So to give some background information, this is overall a board-led directive item, and this was directed back in September of last year. And this came from a place where the County of San Diego Board of Supervisors wanted to take a proactive approach to address drought management and water sustainability practices within the region. And in order to address this on a wider scale, as water affects all life, this is a regional collaboration. So there are involvements of tribal communities, binational partners, and Imperial County as well to address more of this holistic scope. Overall, the goal is to find adaptations to a hotter, drier future to help us build resiliency in the face of climate change. And overall, there's a really big focus on equity. So the equity lens is something that's threaded throughout multiple components of this overall effort. We're currently conducting the regional assessment to produce a report called the Regional Water Equity Report. And I'll go over more of the next steps with that in just a few minutes. So this overall effort is including San Diego County, as I mentioned, but also Imperial County and border communities. So although the report I mentioned will be focused more on this dark blue area of San Diego County in the technical perspective, we're also looking at what water equity means in a more holistic approach in Imperial and border communities as well. So overall, this is a very exciting effort where it'll lead to a lot of different pathways for pilot programs or recommendations for further adjustment for water sustainability practices throughout our region and also for our neighbors as well. So we really do appreciate your feedback tonight and giving us some insight about how we can move forward and build resiliency and address regional drought. So at this time, I will be introducing our special topic speaker, Stephanie Zem. We're really happy to have her here today because she is with Geosyntec, who is a support on this overall effort as well. So Stephanie is a senior water resource planner, and she's going to be giving us the basic overview of Graywater. All right, Stephanie, I'll hand it off to you.
Great, thank you. Let me just get set up here. Can you all hear me okay? Am I muted?
We can hear you, Stephanie, and if you could just share your presentation so it can zoom in a little more.
Okay, but you can see the PowerPoint?
Yes, looks great now.
Awesome, thank you so much, Elise. Very excited to be talking about graywater reuse today. So I'm a senior water resources planner with Geosyntec and really interested in this topic and supporting the county in their regional water equity efforts. So the purpose today is really just to educate you all on what graywater is, reuse opportunities, and so and also looking forward to the discussions later on. Okay, so what is graywater? Graywater is wastewater essentially from your businesses or from your homes that has not been contaminated with potential harmful pollutants like bacteria from food wastes or from toilet flushing. So that would be everything else from like showers or sinks or your washing machine. And those sources can be treated and reused to certain levels for various purposes. So graywater is not to be confused with other source types that can be reused as well. So we have condensate right next door. So condensate is a really clean source of water that comes from air conditioning systems. If you've ever been to the San Diego International Airport, they actually have a bunch of great condensate reuse systems from air conditioning the airport and keeping you cool, that they reuse that for other purposes. So that's a really clean, good alternative source that you can also reuse. Similarly, you can collect stormwater and use that for various purposes as well. And these three types on the left here, graywater, condensate, stormwater, they all have different makeups. You know, if you think about graywater and washing your hands, that's going to be soapy water. So when you think about treating that and reusing that, that's what you're going to treat it for. Stormwater, if it rains, it might fall on your yard and collect some fertilizer. So there's different considerations when you think about treating these different source types and reusing them for different purposes. And then we have the black toilet on the very right. So you actually can reuse black water, but this is typically done on a much larger scale. And this is an important consideration when we think about more localized opportunities to reuse water with your homes and your business versus when you're in an area that might have a regional water recycling system that reuses black water, gray water on a more regional scale. So if you've ever heard of the City of San Diego's Pure Water program, they actually do that on a regional scale, and they treat that black water to a very high standard with professionals that oversee the wastewater treatment plants and that recycling technology. And then they send that through the purple pipe infrastructure, or they send it to indirect potable reuse opportunities, which we could maybe talk a little bit more during the discussion, but wanted to give that overview of the various different source types. And this presentation today is really focused on local graywater reuse opportunities. So there's a lot of important considerations and drivers when we think about implementing graywater reuse solutions. And so I'll talk about some of those starting from left to right. So obviously, when you're reusing water more than once, you have a local water supply benefit. And then moving up, if you're reusing water and you're saving it, then you might see that reflected in your water bill. So you may be able to save some money if you're reusing water more than once. But that needs to be balanced with the upfront costs of installing a graywater reuse system, as well as maintaining it in the long term, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Another really important consideration is the availability of information to make decisions about implementing graywater reuse. So like I talked about how there are those regional water recycling systems with San Diego's Pure Water program, you may not want to do localized on-site reuse if you're in a sewer shed or an area that has that within your municipality. But if you don't, maybe that's a decision point for you to think about graywater reuse. And graywater reuse standards and how municipalities review and approve these systems and permit them really vary throughout jurisdictions. So understanding your own municipality's guidelines is very important for that decision making. And there are risks involved with graywater reuse. It's not a potable source, so you have to be careful. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but being educated about what those risks are is very important. But overall, this is a big sustainability solution for an area that's really looking to increase its local water supply reliability. There's a bunch of indirect benefits. You know, if you're a development project, implementing graywater reuse may get you LEED credits or additional green building benefits. And I think it's definitely a way that, or a thing that our future generations are definitely really interested in. So moving on, I want to go through a couple case studies of the difference between more simple graywater systems and the applications versus more complex graywater systems. So this is an example here of a simple graywater system, a laundry to landscape system in a single family home graphic. So this is where you can take wash water from your washing machine and direct that to a landscape or a garden for irrigation. And the most important part of this is that the irrigation must be subsurface. And the reason why this is simple, and it's pretty easy right now to get a system like this approved and permitted, there's codes, there's guidelines for these systems, is because of that subsurface component. So that means that the public or people in your home won't come in contact with graywater reuse. And it's kind of a safer way to do it directly from wash water to your irrigation needs. And if you'd be interested in retrofitting your home, you know, the cost really varies. The parts to do it aren't very expensive. They're a couple $100, but if you wanted to do it and hiring a contractor, that might be a couple $1,000s. So something really important to consider. There are rebates throughout some municipalities in San Diego County. There's also a lot of really important design considerations that you want to think about when you're thinking of retrofitting your home. So these systems, you install them and they do require maintenance. So you don't want your lines to clog and you want to take care of these systems. You also want to make sure that you don't have any ponded water anywhere, because that might lead to a habitat for mosquitoes or for an opportunity for someone in your home to be exposed to that water. And finally, you want to definitely keep your graywater system separate from your potable water system. You know, there's a lot of DIY opportunities to retrofit these things, but if you aren't really confident, I wouldn't be. I have very limited plumbing experience, then you'd really want to consult a contract professional to do this for you. So moving on to more complex graywater systems. And so for maybe larger businesses and commercial businesses, you may have more than just one sink or shower. You may have multiple, you know, toilet facilities where you may have a bigger opportunity to do this on a larger scale and reuse graywater resources for indoor toilet flushing or perhaps at a landscaped area via spray irrigation. So the difference here is when you have that type of use where you can come into contact with the public, there's going to be a much higher treatment standard required. And vendors who sell these systems will have to have a certification program that they get these systems certified by. Upfront, the cost on these systems are much more expensive, but when you're thinking about certain types of land use here, like hotels or dormitories or airports that have a lot of air conditioning, you may see a longer savings over time, which is a consideration for some of these larger development projects. What we've learned throughout this whole water equity process is that it's really best if you have a new project that you're working on to plan for these systems early on in design. As you can see on these projects here, one of these military operations actually in San Diego, they do take up a lot of space and they have special plumbing and electrical considerations that are really best if you can consider that on early on in project planning. You know, I mentioned the California Plumbing Code earlier and how the simple laundry to landscape systems are a little bit easier to be permitted. These systems do require a more robust review and permitting considerations that some municipalities are just kind of getting used to. That's another consideration. One of the leading municipalities in requiring graywater systems with new development projects that I wanted to highlight is the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. So they've had a program in place since about 2010 where they require new development projects over a certain size to implement these localized on-site reuse systems, including graywater. I believe the threshold now is about 100,000 square feet. So if you have a development project that's above that threshold, then you'll need to include one of these systems. But you can see with some of the volumes here and some of the details, some of the annual water savings are pretty significant. They're millions of gallons a year of water savings, which are probably benefiting these developments. And the costs really range what we've seen for these systems, and it really depends on the size of your development project, but they can range anywhere from about 400,000 to several $1,000,000 to implement these solutions. So definitely a cost to consider, as well as the long-term maintenance and the expertise to maintain these systems in the long term. Seeing out of some of these requirements up in Northern California, and what we're starting to consider here is more efficient ways to construct these projects and these reuse systems. So this idea is one that I love. I think it's really great. So with development projects, and if you tune into another deep dive in a couple of weeks, you'll hear a little bit more about stormwater collection. If there are stormwater requirements that apply to development projects that require the collection and storage and treatment of stormwater. So an idea that has been seen up in San Francisco is where you combine a stormwater treatment and reuse system with a graywater system. So you know it doesn't rain all the time in California. We had a really lucky year and a really wet year this past year. But sometimes if you just have a stormwater treatment collection system and reuse, that's not getting used all the time. And so if you combine it with a daily reuse of graywater, that's going to be a much more cost-effective system with multiple benefits. Share one of these more innovative ideas with the group today. And so graywater reuse and other reuse opportunities isn't just happening in a vacuum in San Diego or California, but it's really happening around the world. There's a lot of lessons learned that we can learn from. The technology is improving, so I think there's a lot of resources that we're starting to pay more attention to on how we can more effectively reuse water more than once. Breakout rooms, we went over kind of the simple designs, the laundry to landscape opportunity that is pretty much allowable now if you wanted to retrofit your home and provide many benefits. Then you also have these more complex systems that do have the higher upfront costs to consider, but may provide more long-term water savings as well as water bill savings. The one thing I didn't mention was the state of California, the state water board is actually coming out with a uniform guidance for municipalities to follow with developing permitting systems that might help incentivize these systems in the future. And then we're just seeing so many great innovative designs of these systems to utilize graywater, condensate, stormwater, even black water more than once. So it's definitely a very exciting field to be in. And with that, that's my last slide. I will plan to turn it over to Elise, and I'm looking forward to discussing graywater with you more in the breakout rooms. Elise, are you there?
Okay, I'm so sorry, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was a really insightful presentation and really informative. Thank you so much for that. So at this time, we're going to be coming into a point where we normally do breakout rooms, but with the amount of folks we have, we're going to keep it in this main room so we can stay as a group together. And during this time, this is when we'll go over any type of questions you may have for the presenter, Stephanie, about Graywater, or myself, the project manager, about the regional water equity effort. But we also have a few other questions to ask you as well, because we do want to hear from you. This is a really great time for us to get your feedback on a lot of different components relating to water and this regional effort. So we also program. Okay.